Hello everyone, I'm JG and welcome back to Music Forever, where today I'm going to be reviewing the newest album from Korn, The Nothing. The last couple of releases from this band have been a bit of a return to form for the group. Prior to that, the band was experimenting with some different sounds and ideas that, for the most part, really didn't work out all too nicely for the band, in my opinion, as well as in the opinion of a lot of fans and music listeners alike. However, like I said, the last couple of releases from these guys have been a bit stronger. Stylistically, they've been a bit more rooted in the more traditional nu metal sounds that the band has been, known for helping revolutionize back in the 90s. And overall, I think that there are a couple of the stronger outings from this band, especially in recent years. So coming into this third record, I guess you could say, of this kind of return to form era for the band, I wasn't really sure what to expect. Was the band going to be able to deliver another interesting slice of this sound they've been playing around with recently, or was this record going to end up being a bit stale because at this point now the band has kind of continued this return to form sound for them a good few records in a row at this point? Given some of the singles from this thing kind of leaned towards the latter of those two things, I was kind of expecting that to be the case with this new album here, unfortunately. And once again, unfortunately, I have to say, I think for the most part, this album ends up kind of being like that, in the sense that stylistically, this project does play very much to the more traditional nu metal sound that this band has been known for at their best, but at the same time, I don't think it's a particularly interesting or exciting release from the group, and I think that throughout this thing, the band plays things nicely enough when it comes to the sounds here, but they also play things so safely here, typically, that the project just doesn't excite me at all. What you have here on this project is, for the most part, your typical Korn album affair, really, at least in this more typical vein of their sound that we've been hearing recently from them, as well as on some of their biggest and best records of years past. The sound here of this thing, it's heavy, it's dark, it's kind of sad and depressing at times as well. The guitars here have a nice thick sound to them that I think works out pretty nicely. All the performances here on this thing are pretty solid. None of them really feel weak or just lacking in energy or anything quite like that. They're all pretty decent for the most part. It's just that compositionally and sonically here, the band just, for the most part, really isn't doing anything all too new or interesting that has me super engaged at this point, because a lot of the ideas and sounds I think the band is playing around with here on this thing are a lot of the same ideas that they were playing around with on their last record and the record before that, as well as a good few other records that the band has put out years ago at this point. However, here on this project, it's not really as new or fresh, and it doesn't really have the benefit of being, like a comeback record of sorts or anything like that. At this point, I know Korn still have it in them to make a decent record, and here on this project, I mean, again, I do want to say this album is pretty listenable, but it's just not super interesting. Now, I do want to mention that there are some highlights here, whether it be full songs that I think are rather decent, or even just some nice moments mixed into this project. I think the opening track to this record, The End Begins, is one of the highlights here. The song kicks off with these bagpipes, and I always like it when Korn mixes some bagpipes into their stuff. I always think it makes for a pretty unique sound for them, and I think that is definitely the case here on this opening cut. It's one of the more unique sounding songs here on this thing. It's one where it gives me something to kind of latch onto and remember this track with, which is something a lot of songs here I don't really think have going for them. I mean, it's not one of the best Korn songs ever written or anything along those lines, but it still is a really decent track in my opinion, and definitely one of the stronger songs here, and one of the more personality-filled cuts. The song Idiosyncrasy is another one of my favorite cuts here, and the track was probably my favorite song here overall. I think the instrumentation here and the performances are pretty decent, probably some of the stronger ones here on this project, but the strongest point of this song overall has to be the vocal performance here on this thing, especially during the bridge of this track. It's very emotional, very aggressive, very off-kilter, and just paranoid in a sense, I guess. I really love the delivery here during the bridge of this track. I think it's one of the standout moments on this record, and it just makes for this song being one of the more interesting cuts on this project overall. Just generally speaking, I feel like the vocal performances across this project is probably one of the strongest aspects to this album. I really feel like Davis does a good job on this thing of giving some really emotional and heartfelt and at times angry performances here on this album. I wouldn't say this album has like his best performances ever on it or anything, but I feel like he's definitely the strongest performer on this thing. The track The Ringmaster is another song here that I think overall is pretty enjoyable. I think it's a bit catchier than some of the other songs here on this project, and all the performances here just feel maybe a little bit stronger than a lot of the other songs here on this record. Again, I don't think this is one of Korn's best songs like ever necessarily, but I still think it's one of the highlights here in this album's particular track listing. And overall, that really sums up the strong points I have with this record, the songs that I think are good, or the aspects of this record that I think are particularly good. Aside from that, I don't really think I have too many like big complaints with it, like particular songs I think are bad, or particular moments here on this album that I think are bad or weak or anything like that. It's just that so many of the other moments here on this record, just a good majority of the songs here just feel a bit too typical for me to really get into all that much to really thoroughly enjoy this project. There's never a moment here on this record where I really want to like turn the record off because it's just a pain to listen to or anything. It's easy enough on the ears to listen to. It's just that so little of it jumps out to me as being particularly interesting. The performances across this record are pretty fine, just not particularly memorable with the exception of some of the vocal parts. The lyrics and song topics aren't super memorable or interesting either. All of the song structures on this thing are also pretty similar to one another. You do have like a few songs here or there that structurally are a bit different, like the opening cut that I mentioned previously, the closing track to this thing, or the track The Seduction of Indulgence that popped up towards the middle of this project. While these tracks are kind of a little breath of fresh air in regards to they're structured differently, they're, with the exception of the opening track that I mentioned previously, just not super memorable in their own right either. I mean, just for the most part, this record just isn't the most interesting, I guess. That's my biggest complaint with it, really. It's performed finely, it sounds fine enough to just listen to, but I just feel a little desire to return to listen to this thing after I stop listening to the album. So overall, if you're a fan of this band, if you're a fan of this style of music as well, this is a project that I still think is worth checking out somewhat. You might enjoy this thing stylistically. It does play to a lot of the same ideas and strengths that were present on the last couple of records from this band, as well as some of the band's best material. It's just that the performances here I think are a bit less memorable overall, but maybe you'll have a different take on it. Maybe you'll still enjoy it despite that, or maybe it'll feel a bit fresher to you. I don't know, so I would still say to check this record out. But if you don't fall into that category of people, if you've never really been a fan of this band or their sound, this record probably won't change your mind. But overall, that is just my own personal opinion when it comes to this project. If you happen to disagree, that's perfectly fine. In fact, feel free to leave your own thoughts on this album in the comment section down below. And while you're down there, make sure you also leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel for more music-related content. Things like album reviews, track reviews, things of that sort. If you enjoy that kind of content, make sure you subscribe. Thank you guys for watching once again, and stay golden.